Snow, silence, and 6 people inside a lonely Bavarian farmhouse. Only one set of footprints found in the snow leading into this home, but never ever leaving. By the time anyone is able to come and check on this family, the chores would be complete, the animals would be tended to, but everyone inside that home would be dead. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you're new here. I hope you're all doing so well. Welcome back to another true crime and makeup episode. Oh yeah. Today, as you know from the title, we are covering the Hinterkaifeck murders, which is insane. We have got a large pool of suspects as an unsolved case to this very day. If you're like me, usually I can't stand unsolved cases. I hate not having closure, but this one blows my freaking mind, and I need to know what you think. If you are new here, hi, my name is Anna. I am a certified yapper, and one day decided I'm going to hop on the internet. I'm going to yap about true crime. I do it twice a week, every single week, on a Wednesday and Sunday. So, if true crime is your jam, I highly suggest you subscribe, get the notification bell on, because like I said, I'm here for you twice a week, every single week, and it's free. And I don't know about you, but I love free stuff. Any details you need regarding me, myself and I, they will all be found listed down below in the description. Don't forget to leave your case suggestions down below in the comments and I'll get them all added to the list. But without any further rambling or any further ado, let's get into the horrifying, bone-chilling case of the Hinterkaifeck murders. As always in these kind of conditions, before anyone makes any assumptions and throws wild accusations on the internet, I am not naked, okay? Not naked, we've got a bandeau on, it's just very hot. I always just like to clear that up because one time someone actually commented on my video and was like, "You're so disrespectful. Who talks about true crime with their boobs out?" And I was like, "Ma'am, excuse me, my boobs they're tucked away. What I have of them anyway, they're tucked away. You just simply couldn't see my top." Anywho, Hinterkaifeck Farm, this was built in 1853 and it was owned by the Gruber family, and it was a kind of home that was passed down from generation to generation, very much the home of a rich, wealthy family. It was located 43 miles north of Munich and it was situated in the state of Bavaria. Now, let's talk about the members of the Hinterkaifeck household. That is going to be a real tongue twister. I'm going to end up being like the Hinterkaifeck, the Hinterfluckflank. So, first up, we have the head of the household, and that is Andreas Gruber. He was 63 at the time. We then have his wife Cecilia, and she was 72. They then had a widowed daughter by the name of Victoria Gabriel. Now, she was 35. She had moved herself back into her parents' home alongside her 2 children, Cecilia Jr., who was 7 years old, and Josef, who was 2 years old. So, Andreas Gruber, right, stays in this big farmhouse, looks like he has it all together, and he really thinks he's the main man. He thinks he is hot. But his neighbours, the locals of the small town, they all knew exactly what he was like. They knew him for his aggression and his brutality toward his own wife, his own daughters, and his own grandchildren. Andreas was the kind of man, if he wasn't happy with you, you wouldn't be having to guess that fact. He would very much make you aware of it, because if he wasn't happy, he's probably going to be chasing you around with a pitchfork or a shotgun. He was the kind of guy that if you were walking down the street and he was on the path that you were on, you'd most likely cross the road, pretend you didn't see him, just to avoid him. And this was simply because he was just known to be so angry and unyielding, and the kind of guy that was so quick to anger. Like, God, if you accidentally scuffed your shoe on the pavement and it knocked a wee stone in his direction, he is going to want to beat your ass. If you owed this guy money, he'd remember it for decades. And if you crossed him in any way, shape or form, he'd make sure you regretted it. Now, people would state that this is a very common trait between farmers in Bavaria. They are very stubborn and hardened due to the conditions that they work in. You know, they're working through harsh winters and tending to a farm year in, year out. But I'm sorry, like, if you don't like that life so much, you could sell your farm for a small fortune, Or you could get helpers on the farm. So don't say, oh, I'm sorry, I've just had a really harsh winter, that's why I punched you in the face. This guy would just build up his anger and his stubbornness. He would marinate it in a pot until that pot couldn't hold any more, and then he'd explode. And if I've not painted enough of a picture for the way Andreas was, these harsh, brutal winters, you know, the ones that apparently gave him like wee temper tantrums, were the same brutal and harsh winters where he would lock his own children in the freezing cold cellar for days at a time. And allegedly, he once had a daughter called Sophie who died from the very conditions that he locked her in that cellar with. As I said earlier, the Gruber Hinterkaifeck farm, this was one that was passed down through the family, generation to generation. So as you can imagine, at one point, it eventually became Andreas's. This was now his farm, because at this point, this was when your worth was tied to your property. But as you can imagine, just because he was deemed to be important does not mean that he was well liked. Neighbours just had no time for him. They didn't want to associate with him because they knew that this is a kind of guy that just holds too many grudges. Like, if I accidentally looked on your path when you were having a bad day, you're going to hold that grudge. The guy has more grudges than I've had hot dinners. Now, his wife, Cecilia, she was described as being more of a shadow of Andreas than she was a partner or a wife. It appeared to outsiders looking in, and even those close to Cecilia, that Andreas very much ruled every aspect of her life. Cecilia was a very hard-working woman. She had been all of her life, and she practically raised Victoria all by herself. So, Victoria Gruber Gabriel, of course, because she's a widow, her married surname became Gabriel. She was described as growing into a very beautiful, striking woman. She was tall, she had a strong figure from all the years of farm work. She was the type of girl that every stable boy wanted to be with, and every maid wanted to be. She was described as having this really beautiful singing voice. She stood out in the church choir. It was known that if you were going to go see Victoria, you probably hear her before you seen her because she was always singing. Now, I'm going to briefly talk about how Victoria ended up becoming a widow who she was married to. So she had married a man by the name of Karl Gabriel. This was in 1914, just before the First World War. Now, he was conscripted into the war. He was on the Western Front, and apparently, allegedly, we're not entirely sure, but sometime later in 1914 or early 1915, he would be killed on the Western Front. Now, there was speculation as to whether this had actually happened because Karl's body was never returned. His body was never seen again. It was believed that Karl hadn't actually died. He had basically faked his own death so he could escape and vanish from his wife. And I was getting to wondering, I was like, you know, why would someone just up and flee from their wife? Like, surely if you're in the war, you're dying to get back home. Like, who goes to such lengths to escape their own wife? Well, I think the kind of man that would do that is the same man that finds out that his wife and her father are getting it on. Yeah, we're going there. We're going right into incest town. So yeah, we've got daddy and daughter, a bond closer than any. And the thing is, this wasn't just some kind of like lurid rumour that someone was making up to get back at the family. This was very much true. Andreas and Victoria, they would be convicted in 1915 of incest. Andreas, he would be sentenced to a year in prison, and Victoria, she would be sentenced to a month in jail. However, her sentence got suspended, but Andreas very much had to serve his year. And listen, this in itself is a hefty scandal, and can you believe it's going to get even worse? So in 1915, Victoria, she would give birth to her daughter Cecilia Jr. And then in 1919, she would give birth to Joseph Gabriel. And listen, all of this is fine and well. Congrats on the kids, Vicky. I hope you have a wonderful life with them. But where this gets messed up, right? Bearing in mind, Karl Gabriel, he was said to have passed away in 1914 or 1915. Victoria claims that Joseph, who was born in 1919, was Karl Gabriel's son. Now listen, I'm not good at math, okay? I do not claim to be a mathematician, but something's no lining up. Because no one's pregnant for 4 years. And I don't believe there was any like frozen sperm that was being inserted. So like, how was this happening? You know? And this is when major news broke out within the Bavarian community, because it came out that the father of Josef was Andreas Gruber. Did you see it coming? Yeah, me too. And of course, to the public, Victoria and Andreas, they just acted completely outraged by such rumours, such nefarious lies. And to be fair, there was talks of many other potential suitors that Victoria might have had. One in particular that is very important to the case is Lorenz Schlittenbauer. Let me double check. Yep, okay, Lorenz Schlittenbauer. Save me. Genuinely, if you could see my script notes that I've had to write up and the way I've had to phonetically spell every single place, face and name, it's tough out here. So Lorenz, he was a farmer in Gruber. He was also a widow himself, so things in common, love to see it. And honestly, depending on who you asked, Lorenz, he might have been Josef's father. Or potentially, he was just the guy that Andreas liked to blame all of his problems on. Lorenz had apparently been involved with Victoria for a brief period of time after Carol had passed away. Who knows? And apparently things were getting serious. You know, this could have been the real deal. There was talks of a possible marriage. But then Daddy Dreas, he gets wind of this and he's like, sorry, my daughter and my girlfriend, and you want to marry her? No. And he puts a stop to any happiness before it even starts. Now, somehow, Andreas had got all of this working in his favour, because this guy Lorenz, he was paying child support for Josef, a son that he was like, this kid ain't even mine, I'm sitting paying for his daycare fees. And unfortunately for Lorenz, this would keep him tied to the family a lot longer than what he wanted. That was until he decided, I'm going to announce the scandal. I am going to announce to the world, well, to Bavaria, that these two, they're getting it on. And that kid isn't just his grandchild, it's his child. Not only this, but Lorenz, he would announce that Victoria and Andreas's incestual illegal love affair was still continuing after Andreas was released from prison. Yeah, I mean, some people don't learn. Now, the Gruber family, they had a very strange place in the social standing within Groburn, because they weren't like banished and they weren't outcasts, even though like most people would have preferred it to be that way. But they still went to markets, they still cut deals with neighbours and participated in local affairs. But it was very clear that there was this wall between the locals and the Gruber Gabriel household, and I mean, this wall was probably built and developed by Andreas, and the bricks used was probably grudges, enemies, and plans of revenge. Now, the Hinterkaifeck farm, it wasn't in the heart of town. It was actually about a kilometre away, and it was surrounded by fields and forests and little windy roads, which was perfect for a family like the Gruber Gabriels, who didn't want to be involved with anyone. And whilst they're in this little bubble, it definitely didn't stop them from being the topic of conversation and the topic of public gossip. But I mean, listen, Andreas and his family, they're basically handing out kindling to fuel that fire. I mean, come on, like, incest. Now, these murders, they didn't just come out of nowhere. It was something that seemed to build up over time. I mean, a short amount of time, but time nonetheless. There would be many strange occurrences that would take place, but one of the most notable ones was when Krishen Dreiger, the maid of the household, she just up and quit one day. Very, very abrupt, and she was saying that this was because the house was haunted. She didn't feel safe in the house. She was convinced that there was evil spirits and demons inside. She had said on many occasions that she would hear these really unsettling sounds coming from the attic, and there was no explanation behind them. I mean, the whole entire family would be downstairs, and yet it sounds like there's someone up in the attic walking around. Now, Josef and Cecilia Jr., they were also terrified about these sounds that were coming from the attic. It wasn't just Krishen's that was hearing them. They had said that they would hear the wooden beams creaking at all hours. They would hear these shuffling footsteps, like someone was just shuffling around up there, Don't know why I did that face when I shuffled, but here we are. I mean, if the thing up in the attic was shuffling around like that, I think I'd get a fright. But it wasn't just this. There would be doors that were locked suddenly being unlocked and left open. Items from the home had started to randomly disappear or be misplaced. There was tools going missing from the shed, and even at some point, the keys to the house and the keys to the barn were stolen. But by who? And it wasn't just the people in the house who were feeling this unsettling feeling. It was very clear that the animals on the land were feeling the same. Dogs were growling into empty corners and dark hallways, and the cows, who were usually really placid, were suddenly mooing all the way into the night and the morning. It was almost this sense as though something terrible was coming. Victoria, she had started to feel like there was someone watching her at all times, especially when she would go out to tend to the animals. She said it felt like there was thousands of eyes on her, and she slowly but surely became a shell of herself. She was pale, she was anxious, she was constantly looking over her shoulder. A young woman who once sang her way through life suddenly stopped. She didn't have it in her to sing. She was too anxious, too sleep deprived. Now, Andreas, he tries to play all of this off for a period of time, right? And he says, it's just a mystery helper. It's literally just one of the neighbours coming in, tidying up for us, feeding the animals, just doing like nice neighbourly deeds, because no one would dare cross me, Andreas Gruber. Like, this family, if they went out, say they're on a day trip, they're going to the market, they're going to go sell cheese in the local square, right? Someone was coming into the house and doing their cleaning duties. Like, literally cleaning their house and then feeding the animals, tending to their fire. Like, everything that they would do, their daily routine, was being conducted by someone else when they were out. And Andreas is like, nothing to fear, nothing to see. Someone's just trying to take the weight off our feet. And whilst he's grateful, or, you know, at least pretending to be grateful and unafraid, this would be something far more sinister than any of them could imagine. Because it was very clear now that whoever this person was, they weren't just lurking outside or in the attic anymore. They had obviously been watching this family, lurking around the home, learning their routines. This basically says to them, I know when you're home and I know when you're not. I know what time the animals are fed. I know it all. I've seen it all. I don't know why suddenly I sounded like Santa Claus there. I know when you're sleeping and I know when you're awake. But I mean, they probably did. Now, it would actually be later revealed that Andreas at one point had mentioned that he was hearing whispering and muttering coming from inside the walls of the home. Right? But he laughs and jokes it off. He says like, oh, you know, it must be the devil coming for me. And I mean, like, I could see why he would believe that. Because when we get to the end of this case, there are going to be some shocking revelations. So in March of 1922, Andreas would find a strange paper on his porch. This paper was a Munich newspaper, which no one in his house got, wasn't something he was subscribed to. But ultimately, he thinks, you know, it's probably the postman, he's probably mixed up someone's post with my own. But it would later be revealed that not a single person in that area in Bavaria was subscribed to the Munich newspaper. So where did that come from and what did that mean? Then the keys to the farmhouse, they went on a permanent walkabout, right? They disappeared. No one could find them. Everyone was saying that it wasn't them that had touched them. The kids got blamed. Victoria got blamed. But ultimately, nothing would be found. Not only this, but there would be footprints that led up to the farmhouse. Bearing in mind, it's very snowy at this point. It's a harsh winter. Footprints came out of the forest, came out of the woodland area, led up to the house, but never exited the house. Those footprints only led inside. Now, the print within the footprint, like the print of the shoes, didn't match anyone's in that house, and they were too big to be anyone's in that house. These were large, they were deep, that's what she said, and they looked very deliberate. It was like whoever was doing this wanted that family to know that someone who doesn't belong in that home is in there. Now, Andreas, he did mention this to a few of the locals, that he had found these prints in the snow, and he was asking, you know, was it you? Like, do you know anyone that might have been up at my house? The locals tell him that they have no idea what he's talking about, who it could be, but they said, if you're worried, call the police. But Andreas, he refused, because he needs help from no one. The same evening, the shuffling in the attic would also be heard by Andreas, and he went up, goes to investigate. He's got a weapon in hand ready to attack. But when he goes into the attic, no one and nothing is in there. Now, there would also be a strange incident reported to school friends by Cecilia Jr. She had stated that her mother Victoria had fled from the farmhouse on Thursday night, March the 30th. This was apparently because there was a violent quarrel between Victoria, Cecilia Sr. and Andreas. She had ran away for hours, and when she was found it was clear that she had been hiding out in the forest. She didn't want to return home, and why was that? So then on the afternoon of Friday the 31st of March 1922, the new maid would arrive at the farm, and this was Maria Baumgartner. She had been escorted to Hinterkaifeck by her sister, and it is determined that this sister was the last person to see this family and her sister, the maid, alive. And no one could have imagined that this day that started like any other would end in the most unimaginable horror. Now, very quickly, before we dive into the details of the actual murders, let's just refresh our minds regarding the surroundings of the farm. So, Hinterkaifeck, it's not in the heart of town, it is about 1 kilometre out. It is isolated to a certain degree. It's surrounded by fields and forests and windy roads. These windy roads were dangerous to travel in the winter. Also, the forest and the woodland was also dangerous to travel. It was really slippy. It would be easy to get stranded, and let's be honest, if you get stranded out by Hinterkaifeck, Andreas probably isn't going to give you a bed for the night. And as much as this family loved their isolation, this was almost too isolated, because if something did happen, if anything was amiss, no one was going to know because no one was out there. So that same evening, Andreas, Cecilia Sr., Victoria and Cecilia Jr., they would be lured to the farmstead barn one by one. First up was Andreas, who would be lured out to the barn where he would be murdered. After he had went out and been murdered, it would then be Cecilia Sr., who then entered the barn and would also be killed. It appeared that there was no sign of struggle, there was no sort of fight that had broken out. It was deemed that the next victim would be Victoria, who was just going about her daily chores when she would encounter the intruder. Forensic deductions had suggested that Victoria had no idea that the intruder was there. She was doing her tasks when she was suddenly struck in the back. And devastatingly for Victoria, there was no one within the proximity that would be able to hear her scream. It's then believed that Cecilia Jr. had went out to look for members of her family when no one had returned, and she too would encounter this intruder. She would be struck by the exact same weapon, which quickly ended her life. And it didn't stop there, because this intruder would make their way inside the farmhouse, go to young Josef's bassinet where he was sleeping, and murder the child as well. The intruder then goes to the sleeping chambers where the maid Maria Baumgartner was asleep. They both be murdered again with the same weapon. Now, I will get into what exactly happened or is believed to have happened to the victims in this case, but we're just going to move on to the next day right now, April the 1st, 1922. There's coffee sellers Edward and Hans Shirovsky. They go to the family home and they knock on the door, obviously trying to sell their coffee. Now, it was strange. The farm seemed eerily quiet and there was no reply whatsoever. When they get no reply at the door, they proceed to walk around the farm and they're knocking on the windows, trying to get the attention of the family. But still there was no answer. And to be honest, they never suspected that anything sinister might have taken place. The only thing that they had noted was the gate to the machine house. That was left open. But again, there was nothing really to arouse any suspicion. Now, Cecilia Jr., her school, they had actually realised that Cecilia was absent and there was no explanation for it. This was really weird within the school. Usually there'd be an explanation when a child is absent for a number of days. The family also didn't attend Sunday church like they normally would. So the locals, they start talking, they're gossiping, they're whispering. Where is the family? Why are they not attending church? Not knowing that this family have been brutally murdered in their own home. And what was really strange for anyone that passed by the home who hadn't seen the family, the house was still being tended to. The animals were being fed, the fire was being stoked, work was still being conducted, and even the cleaning chores of the Gruber children they were being carried out as well. Even the milk was being collected, but how can this be if nobody's home? So then on April the 4th, Albert Hoffner, an engineer, he goes over to the farm and he was meant to be completing some engine repair work. He's there, chaps the door, no one answers. He waits there for around an hour. No one appears. He decides then that he's just going to get on with his work repair, get the money later, it's fine. This work would take him around 4.5 hours, and nobody came or went. Now that same day around 3:30pm, Laurent Schlittenbauer, he had sent his 16-year-old son Johann and his 9-year-old stepson to the farm because everyone's becoming very aware that the family haven't been seen in days. He wanted them to go and check, see if they could see anyone, see if there was any signs that people were inside and alive. When the children returned, they told him, "We can't see anyone at the farm. There doesn't appear to be anyone in." And Lorenz decides that he's going to go over and check for himself. Now, when Lorenz goes over, he doesn't go by himself, which is probably a smart idea because you just don't know what you're walking into. So he goes along with Michael Paul and Jacob Siegel. The three of them, when they go over, they would enter through the barn and they would be met with a horrifying sight. They would find the bodies of Andreas, Cecilia Sr., Victoria and Cecilia Jr. Lorenz would then enter the home and he would find the bodies of Josef and Maria. So the authorities, they would be called and they arrived shortly after, and when they entered Hinterkaifeck, it was like this home was just now frozen in time. It was a place of death. Bodies in bedrooms, bodies in the barn. Every single element suggested forethought, patience, dedication to taking this family down. Just a complete detachment from human life. They had deemed that whoever committed these murders knew the family and really wanted them gone. Now the victims in the barn, they had suffered horrific injuries. The elderly Cecilia Gruber, she was found to have 8 holes in her skull. Her daughter Victoria, she was deemed to have 9 holes in her skull. There didn't appear to be any signs of strangulation on Victoria, but there were some subtle signs of strangulation on Cecilia Sr. When it comes to Cecilia Jr., she had 1 massive hole to the right side of her face. It was deemed that these victims had been killed with a mattock, so like a pickaxe type of thing. And then young Cecilia, she had also been bludgeoned with an iron rod. With this bludgeoning, she had suffered from a completely smashed jaw. However, the fateful injury against this little girl would be from a penknife that was used to slit her throat. This little girl, when she was found, she was also half naked, which of course was something likely done by the killer. And in her death throes, this little girl had actually started ripping out clumps of her own hair from the complete pain that she was like she just couldn't cope. She reacted in this way, and she was alive for hours before she would succumb to her injuries. Now, the items that were later found in the hayloft, being the iron band and also the pickaxe, these were things that belonged to Andreas Gruber. His injuries, however, were significantly different to the other family members. He was deemed to have died from a fall onto the pickaxe tip that was lying on the ground. This wound tore open his carotid artery and he would bleed to death in a very short space of time. The flesh had been torn open on the right side of his cheek and his cheekbone was actually protruding from the skin. But this was the only injury he had, a fall onto the pickaxe. Now, the killer, they had obviously tried to hide the body. They were sort of half buried under hay and behind a wooden door. Inside the house, Maria Baumgartner, she had suffered injuries to the right side of her face and was found to have died from at least 1 hole to the top of her skull. Young Josef Gabriel, he had been slaughtered in his bassinet, but it is deemed that he would have died from the very first blow to his head. Now, because investigators were able to deem that the weapons used in the murder was ones that had in fact belonged to the family, they believed this was a sign that someone wanted to get back at them, use their own livelihood against them to punish them. The crime scene was photographed, the bodies were examined, and the evidence was catalogued. But there was so much that would be lost to mishandling or just complete inexperience. Now, a key point of intrigue for the police were the footprints that had led up to the house but never left the house. Those ones that looked like someone entered and never left the home. This had people thinking, had this killer been living in the home days before the murder? Were they just waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike? Were they hiding in the attic? Were they hiding in the barn? Did they murder the family because they were discovered? Of course, the investigators at this point, they can only really speculate. I mean, they have no cold hard evidence that this was the case. But the idea that this person, this perpetrator, had been living in the home with the family, breathing the same air, maybe just a wall away, that added some crazy psychological horror to a case that was already terrifying. So the investigators, they very quickly start asking questions to potential eyewitnesses. They're trying to find out what might have happened to this family. Now, on the night after the crime, 3 days before the bodies were discovered, Michael Plockle, he had been passing by Hinterkaifeck farm when he noticed that the oven had been heated by someone. Now, that very person that had heated up this oven, they had actually approached Michael Plockle with a lantern in hand and basically used it to blind him, like to throw him off course in the woods. Now, of course, when something like this happens, when he's been unable to identify who this person was, he just thinks, see you later, I'll just continue on my merry way. Probably thinking it was Andreas Gruber just being a bit of a jackass. Now, he said he had noticed when he was passing by that the fire that had been lit by this person had a really revolting smell. Now, this particular incident, it wouldn't be followed up and there would be no investigation conducted to try and determine what was being heated in this oven. Now, on April the 1st, around 3 a.m, a farmer and butcher, Simon Ryblander, he was on his way home near Brunnen when he would see two very mysterious looking figures at the edge of the forest. When these strangers had noticed Simon, they turned around and had their back to him so he couldn't see their faces. And later on, when he had heard about the murders at Hinterkaifeck farm, he thought possibly these two strangers could be involved. Then, in the middle of May of 1927, a stranger was said to have stopped a resident of Weidhofen. This was around midnight. They had started asking this person questions relating to the murder. When the resident tried to answer their questions, this person just shouted in the face, "I'm the murderer!" and ran away. And this stranger was never identified. And whilst witness statements never really gave the police much to go by, if anything, they did have a long list of suspects that they believed could potentially have been involved. Now, first up, we do have Carol Gabriel, Victoria's ex, the one who apparently died in 1914 or 15, but also apparently didn't die and had actually just abandoned his wife. Now, many people believe that he was alive and kicking, and many people believe that he was the Hinterkaifeck murderer. The reason for this is because after the end of the Second World War, war captives from Schrobenhausen, they were released prematurely from Soviet captivity. And they had claimed that they had been sent home by a German-speaking Soviet officer. And this officer, they claimed to be the Hinterkaifeck murderer. Now, I have to say, some of the men, the captives that were released, they later retracted this statement where they said that, it was Carol Gabriel. But many of them did stick to their statement and they say, no, I am sure that this was Carol Gabriel that had said this. But obviously, when other people retract their statement, it sort of diminishes any trust that you can have within that theory. But some did theorise that the officer in question was no one other than Carol Gabriel. Now, the one that many believe was the Hinterkaifeck murderer was Lorenz Schlittenbauer. The one who Victoria had a relationship with and the one who was believed to be Josef's father, depending on who you asked and which day of the week it was. Now, he became a suspect because right after the bodies had been found, he started acting very suspiciously. When he and his friends had turned up to try and look for the family, they had to break a gate to enter the barn because all of the doors were locked. However, once they discovered the bodies in the barn, Lorenz was then able to unlock the farmhouse and enter where he would find Josef and Maria. Why did he have a key though? many speculate that he was the person that stole the key to the farmhouse that had just went missing days prior. Although many others had speculated that because he was Victoria's lover, that possibly he already had a key to the house. But why didn't he unlock the door in the first place? Bit weird. Now, the bodies within the barn and the bodies within the house, they had all been disturbed by Lorenz Schlittenbauer, which ultimately compromised the investigation. Did he deliberately try and do this? Was he deliberately trying to mess it up in case there was any prints that were there? Well, then now he could say, yeah, I did touch them. I went to check on them. I went to check their pulse or something. And years after this, he would still remain the primary suspect because he just kept making really weird statements about the murders, and some comments he would say were things that people believed only the murderer would know. Not only this, but he was also spotted at the Hinterkaifeck farm after it was demolished, and many believed and speculated that possibly Lorenz had killed the family after Victoria had demanded financial support. Then we have the Gump brothers, who we haven't mentioned until this point because they weren't really relevant to the case. However, Adolf Gump, he was suspected as early as April the 9th. Now, this was due to his connections within the Friedkorps Oberland, because as a Friedkorps member, it was believed that he had participated in at least 9 separate murders of farmers. And I'm sorry, but this kind of makes him the perfect candidate. Now, the sister of Adolf and Anton Gump, she would make a deathbed confession, and this confession was none other than, my brothers, they're the Hinterkaifeck murderers. Now, in 1971, a woman by the name of Therese T., she had wrote a letter and stated that at the age of 12, she had claimed that she had witnessed her mother receiving a visit from the mother of Carol and Andreas S. This mother had claimed that her 2 sons were the Hinterkaifeck murderers. Like, babe, you're telling the wrong person, tell the goddamn police. But the reason she believed this is because her son had stated that he was really upset that he had lost his penknife, and a penknife would be discovered in the farmhouse once it had been demolished. And when it was found, it couldn't be assigned to anyone from the house. There was a man by the name of Josef Betz who had actually named a man by the name of Peter Weber as a suspect. Now, the two worked together between 1919 and 1920. They had shared their room together, and one night Peter Weber, he says to Josef that they should kill the old man for the family's money. Now, Peter Weber, he kind of laughed off the subject and never mentioned it again when Josef didn't take him up on it. Now, the former maid Crescens Rieger, she had stated that she believed the suspects in this case could have been Carol and Anton Beischler, alongside someone by the name of George Seigel. She had stated that these men knew the premises very well and that they sort of hated the family, especially Andreas, and they had even stated once that they believed this family would have been better off dead. Now, they had done some work on the farm at some point, and Crescens, she had believed that they knew the extent of the family fortune and they wanted to get their hands on it. It was also speculated that a German migrant by the name of Paul Mueller could have been the murderer. He had actually been the prime suspect in an 1889 murder of a Massachusetts family, and it was believed that he killed dozens. The Hinterkaifeck murders apparently bore incredible similarities to the ones that he was believed to have committed in Massachusetts. This included the slaughter of an entire family using a farming tool, a pickaxe. And then we have the suspect that most people seem to agree with online, and that is that the suspect was Andreas Gruber himself, the patriarch of the Gruber-Gabriel family. It was believed that he had just cold-bloodedly murdered his entire family. They believe this would account to why the killer had lingered at the farm for the next 3 days, as Andreas Gruber wouldn't have had anywhere else to go, and if he did go, they'd be like, where's your family, Andreas? No seen them in a while. It was believed that he continued tending to the farm animals, he was feeding them, he was stoking the fire, he was carrying out the cleaning duties, so nothing looked amiss. He had been cooking meals, and he was also ripping off new dates in the calendar that revealed April the 1st. And the fact that someone was present at the farm still, that was observed by many eyewitnesses, as we know. So as it goes, people believe that someone had went to the Gruber-Gabriel home looking for the family, checking in on them, because as we know, the weather was bad. It's believed that they had entered the barn or entered the home and seen what Andreas had done to his entire family, and then they thought, hey, you, I'm going to do the same to you. You should feel the pain and meet the same fate as your innocent family. Now, many believe the person who got revenge on Andreas was actually Lorenz Schlittenbauer. And you're maybe wondering, why? Why would he do that? Well, apparently it's believed that Victoria had confided in Lorenz about her father, and she had stated that this incestual relationship that was happening wasn't consensual. Andreas was raping his daughter. She couldn't get help. She couldn't ask anyone for help because she was terrified of this man. And listen, this is speculative, okay? This is what people believe. I'm not saying verbatim that it happened, but if it did, he deserves to rot in hell, that scumbag, cretin, loser. But where this lines up in the case is the fact that, remember, young Cecilia, she was found half naked. People wonder, had Andreas actually taken her out to the barn to try and rape her? Did Victoria know what was going to happen because she had suffered the same? Did she go to try and save her daughter? Did Cecilia Sr. also run to their aid to try and save them? They've tried to stop this rape taking place, and Andreas has decided to murder them. Now, people had asked, well, why wouldn't this perpetrator kill her? Why wouldn't they try and hide the bodies? But it's believed the winter was so harsh that the ground had been frozen. This is why the killer had lingered. They were going to try and hide the bodies, but ultimately they couldn't. Despite there being such a large pool of suspects, and many that I think could be believable, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain unsolved to this very day. And so I pose the question to you, who do you believe could have been the Hinterkaifeck murder or murderers? Do you think it was one person? Do you think it was multiple? Do you think Andreas Gruber had murdered his own family? Let me know down below. When it comes down to like the kind of theories that I believe, I think I actually do lean more to it being Andreas Gruber, but then who would kill him? I don't know if I believe it would be Lorenz. I don't know. But then also Paul Mueller, the German migrant. I mean, it all kind of lines up. The fact that he slaughtered an entire family with a farm tool, I mean, it's kind of written in the stars, you know what I mean? But I don't know. I'm so intrigued to know what you think because it's just insane. And the fact that it's not been solved blows my mind. But my loves, that is it for another true crime and makeup episode. I hope this one was new to you. If it wasn't new to you, I hope maybe I've told you something you didn't already know. If you do enjoy my content, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm, really helps push out my videos, which means the entire world to me. Any details you need regarding me, myself and I, any products used on my face, will all be listed down below in the description for you. Also, let me know what cases you would like to see me cover in the comments down below. But that is it for today. Please, please, please remember, be a good person. Do not be a bad person. Stay safe, look after each other, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!